Israel claims responsibility for deadly strike on Gaza refugee camp. Russian strikes inflicting unimaginable sufferings on Ukrainians. Hello, good afternoon and salam Malaysia Madani. Thanks for joining us. I'm SAHIH and you're watching World Today. At least 50 Palestinians were killed when Israel airstrikes hit a densely populated refugee camp in North Gaza as Israel ground forces battle Hamas base in a sprawling tunnel network. Officials at Gaza Indonesian hospital said more than 50 Palestinians had been killed and 150 wounded when tons of aerial explosives struck residential dwellings in the heart of the Jabalia camp in urbanized North Gaza. Gaza's health ministry said dozens more were likely buried under the rubble, denouncing what it called a heinous Israel massacre at the camp. The attack resulted in a swathe of destruction, with deep bomb craters and gutted, multi-story cement dwellings as people dug through mounds of rubble with their hands in search of loved ones. Jabalia is home to 116,000 people in an area covering 1.4 square kilometers. The carnage came as international leaders raised the alarm over the spiraling bloodshed and mounting humanitarian crisis in Gaza, where several hours before the strikes, the health ministry gave a toll of 8,525 dead. Despite the soaring fatalities, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu dismissed international calls for a humanitarian pause in fighting to enable emergency aid deliveries to civilians suffering from critical shortages of food, medicine, drinking water and fuel. Meanwhile, the White House on Tuesday said 66 trucks of humanitarian assistance entered Gaza in the last 24 hours and that dozens more are expected to be cleared for deliveries. White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby told reporters that President Joe Biden would speak later with Jordan's King Abdullah for discussion about Gaza. Kirby said the level of truck aid deliveries so far is just a fraction of how much is needed in Gaza, the Palestinian enclave under siege by Israel in retaliation for the 7th October attack on Israel by Hamas fighters. Kirby added that officials would like the number of trucks entering Gaza to reach up to 100 a day. Kirby had no comment on a large blast at a Gaza refugee camp, saying he had no information on it, but he claimed that killing civilians is not a war aim of the Israel regime. Humanitarian pauses in fighting could be of value, Kirby said, but there has to be credible support on both sides in favor of such pauses. Recently, the US has rejected global calls for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, arguing it is not the right answer right now. Israel had also vowed there will be no ceasefire until Hamas is dismantled. 8 trucks have been trickling into Gaza from Egypt over the past week via Rafah, the main crossing that does not border Israel. In a related development, the World Health Organization warned that a public health catastrophe is imminent in Gaza amid overcrowding, mass displacement and damage to water and sanitation infrastructure. The WHO warned of the risk of civilian deaths not directly linked to Israel bombardment. The United Nations Humanitarian Office said in a statement that the water supplies to southern Gaza came to a halt on 30th October for unknown reasons. According to spokesperson from the UN Children's Agency, James Elder, there is a risk of infant death due to dehydration with water output at 5% of normal levels. He explained that child deaths, particularly infant death, due to dehydrations are a growing threat, adding that children were getting sick from drinking salty water. He also stated that about 940 children are reported missing in Gaza, with some thought to be stuck beneath the rubble. Following this development, the WHO also called for fuel to be allowed into Gaza to allow desalination plant to operate. Israel has blockaded the Gaza Strip and refuses to allow in fuel supplies, saying it could be used by Hamas for military purposes. On another note, Bolivia is severing diplomatic ties with Israel as a rebuke for its bloody offensive in the Gaza Strip after a deadly Hamas attack last month. Deputy Foreign Minister Freddy Mamani said the government has decided to cut diplomatic relations with Israel in repudiation and condemnation of the aggressive and disproportionate Israel military offensive being carried out in the Gaza Strip. Minister in the presidency, Maria Nella Prada, also announced the country is sending humanitarian aid to Gaza while demanding an end to the Israeli attacks. The government of leftist Luis Arce is the first in Latin America to cut ties with Israel since the divisive conflict escalated on 7th October. Bolivia only announced it was restoring ties with Israel in 2019, a decade after they were cut over previous attacks on the Gaza Strip. The decision by Bolivia comes after Colombia called for Israel ambassador to leave the country before rowing back the comments in a diplomatic spat over the offensive. Elsewhere around the globe, the United States, Canada and Britain took aim at sources of support to Myanmar's military regime, building on earlier sanctions and targeting its ability to buy weapons. The U.S. Treasury Department said the latest sanctions target companies and individuals, including government officials who perpetuate or facilitate violence in the Southeast Asian country. Among key actions taken were sanctions against state-owned Myanmar oil and gas enterprise. The United States said this remains the biggest single source of foreign revenue for the military regime, providing hundreds of millions of dollars each year. The U.S. Treasury also designated 3 companies that have helped the military regime import arms and other goods and 5 people. In a separate statement, the UK announced sanctions against 5 individuals and 1 entity involved, either in providing financial services to the regime or supplying restricted goods. Meanwhile, Canada is imposing sanctions against 39 individuals and 22 entities for supporting Myanmar's military regime. Its authorities said that with their latest actions, the country has now taken aim at 95 individuals and 63 entities. Russian strikes are inflicting unimaginable suffering on the people of Ukraine. More than 40% of them need humanitarian assistance. Ramesh Rajasingham, Director of Coordination in the UN Humanitarian Office, said thousands of civilians have been killed in strikes on homes, schools, fields and markets since Russia's invasion in February 2022. The UN Human Rights Office has formally verified 9,900 civilians killed, but he said the actual number is certainly higher. Roger Singham said about 18 million Ukrainians, more than 40% of the population, need some form of humanitarian assistance, and as winter approaches, these needs will be magnified. Roger Singham said significant damage and destruction of critical infrastructure continues to severely impact civilian access to electricity, heating, water and telecommunications, a particular concern as winter fast approaches, which will put the elderly, disabled and displaced most at risk. The Russian military methodically targeted Ukraine's power station and other critical infrastructure with missile and drone strikes during the last winter season, resulting in frequent power outages. Coming up next, Japan police arrest suspected gunman after hostage standoff. Two South Korean police officers were stabbed outside a compound that houses the presidential office in Seoul. According to a report by Yonhap news agency, the suspect was arrested at the scene. The report said the 77-year-old assailant, identified by his surname Park, began yelling in front of the compound and stabbed the officers as they tried to subdue him. One officer was stabbed in the stomach and the other in the left arm, and both were being treated in hospital. After taking office last year, President Yoon Suk-yeol relocated the presidential office to the central Yongsan district, moving away from the Blue House, which had served as the presidential residence for decades. South Korea has been shaken by a series of stabbings this year, including an incident in which 2 people were killed and a dozen more wounded after being attacked near a department store.
최근에 들어서 요즘에 총령 사건이 많이 일어나는 것 같아서 치안적인 부분에서 걱정이 많이 되고 있고, 특히 사회적 약자로서 약간 좀 위험하다고 느끼거나 이제 길을 가거나 이제 어두운 시간대에 다닐 때 안전하지 못한다고 느낄 때가 있는 것 같아요.
According to official statistics, South Korea is typically an extremely safe country with a murder rate of 1.3 per 100,000 people in 2021. By comparison, the United States has 7.8 homicide deaths per 100,000 people. Japanese police have detained a suspected gunman, reportedly in his 80s, who was holed up in a post office on Tuesday with several hostages. After an hours-long standoff in Warabi, outside Tokyo, police finally detained the man late Tuesday evening. His motive was unclear, but police believe the suspect was also involved in an incident at the hospital that wounded 2 people, and reports said that a fire in an apartment block may also be linked. He had holed himself up in the post office at around 2:15 p.m. local time in possession of what appears to be a gun, the city authorities had said on their website. Later, as police negotiated with the man, television footage saw a woman in her 20s believed to have been a hostage walking out of the post office shortly before 7:30 p.m. The Asahi Shimbun Daily reported that police stormed the building around 10:20 p.m., took the man into custody and confiscated his gun. 2 people were slightly wounded, reportedly a doctor and a patient, after shots were apparently fired from the street into the hospital in nearby Toda. Violent crime is rare in Japan, in part because of strict regulations on gun ownership, but cases still occur. At least 19 people were killed and as many injured during local elections in the Philippines. Rex Lodianco, spokesman of the Commission on Elections, said the authorities recorded 29 violent incidents from 28 August to 30th October when elections were conducted in different phases. Most of the incidents were reported in the southern autonomous Bangsa Moro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao and Bicol region. Some 113 more violent incidents are being probed to determine whether those are connected to the elections. According to a report, the elections were originally set for 2020 but were postponed twice. Some 672,432 seats were up for grabs in the polls. While villages are the lowest level government unit, the council posts are hotly contested because they are used by political parties to cultivate grassroots networks and build a support base for local and general elections. More than 300,000 police officers and soldiers have been deployed to secure polling stations in more than 42,000 villages. The elections are a traditionally volatile time in the Philippines, which has lax gun laws and a violent political culture. Tropical storm Pillar scraped past Central America, causing heavy rains along the Pacific coast, but growing less likely to make landfall. The U.S. National Hurricane Center said with maximum sustained winds of 80 kilometers per hour, Pillar was slowly moving towards El Salvador, but its core is expected to remain offshore. The Hurricane Center said by Thursday it is expected to start moving away from land. Until then, it said Pillar could produce rainfall of 12.7 to 25 centimeters over a portion of Central America, stretching from southern El Salvador across southern Honduras, western Nicaragua into northern Costa Rica through Wednesday. The center added that this rainfall will produce flash and urban flooding along with mudslides in areas of higher terrain. According to El Salvador's Environment Minister Fernando Lopez, a cold front was preventing Pillar from reaching land. Nevertheless, the storm has caused heavy rains over most of the country, which is on red alert. El Salvador has a population of 6.6 million, and nearly 90% of its territory is vulnerable to floods, landslides and earthquakes. Last year, the country was hit by Tropical Storm Julia, which killed 10 people and caused millions of dollars in losses. A Southern California wildfire fueled by desert winds burned 2,200 acres and prompted evacuation orders for 4,000 people in Riverside County. The Highland fire nearly doubled in size overnight, pushed to the west by Santa Ana winds, a seasonal phenomenon when dry desert air blows towards the ocean, creating a fire hazard in Southern California. The California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection said the fire was 0% contained as of Tuesday morning. The department crews attacked the blaze with teams on the ground and aircraft dropping fuchsia-colored retardant. The Riverside County Fire Department ordered the evacuation of roughly 4,000 people, including the small town of Aguanga, where the fire started on Monday. The fire presented a continued threat to structures with several roads closed and evacuation orders in effect. Southern California has so far experienced a mild fire year in 2023 after unusually heavy rainfall that included the first tropical storm to reach heavily populated areas of the state for the first time in 84 years. More than 20,000 Afghans living in Pakistan rushed to the borders ahead of a government deadline for 1.7 million undocumented people to leave or face arrest and deportation. Millions of Afghans have poured into Pakistan, fleeing decades of successive conflicts, including an estimated 600,000 since the Taliban government seized power in August 2021. The Pakistan government has said from today it would begin arresting undocumented Afghans who refuse to leave and taking them to new holding centres from where they will be processed and returned to Afghanistan. Afghans would be allowed to leave voluntarily until the 1st November deadline, after which staggered deportations will begin from tomorrow. A senior government official said at least 18,000 people had joined a snacking 7-kilometre long queue at the Torkham border in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province by yesterday afternoon. Another 5,000 people had arrived at the southern Chaman crossing in Balochistan, and the number continued to grow as the Afghan refugees were waiting for their turn to cross the border in vehicles, lorries and trucks. Once over the border, they face a further bottleneck as they must register with Afghan officials. Thailand has started to waive visa requirements for arrivals from India and Taiwan beginning this month until May 2024 in a bid to draw in more tourists as high season approaches. Thailand in September scrapped visa requirements for Chinese tourists, the country's top pre-pandemic tourism market, with 11 million of the record 39 million arrivals in 2019. According to the latest government data, from January to 29 October, there were 22 million visitors to Thailand, generating $25.67 billion. Spokesperson Chai Wacharonki said arrivals from India and Taiwan can enter Thailand for 30 days. India has been Thailand's fourth largest source market for tourism so far this year, with about 1.2 million arrivals after Malaysia, China and South Korea. Inbound tourism from India showed signs of growth as more airlines and hospitality chains targeted that market. Thailand is targeting about 28 million arrivals this year, with the new government hoping the travel sector can offset continued weak exports that have constrained economic growth. Coming up in sports, Vinicius extends Real Madrid deal until 2027. FIFA confirmed on Tuesday that the sole confirmation of interest in hosting the 2030 World Cup came from Morocco, Portugal and Spain, with Uruguay, Argentina and Paraguay hosting celebratory games. On 4th October, FIFA announced that the combined bid of Morocco, Spain and Portugal would host the 2030 World Cup, subject to the completion of a successful bidding process. The inaugural World Cup in 1930 was held in Uruguay and won by the hosts. It marks the first time the World Cup will be staged across 3 continents and 6 countries. FIFA's announcement came on the same day soccer's world governing body confirmed Saudi Arabia was the sole bidder for the 2034 World Cup. FIFA had invited bids from Asia and Oceania for the tournament by 31st October, and Saudi Arabia announced it would bid only minutes after the announcement on 4th October. This first step will be followed by true bidding processes for both FIFA World Cup editions, with the hosts to be appointed by the member associations gathered at FIFA congresses. In accordance with these regulations, the FIFA administration will conduct a targeted dialogue with bidders to ensure complete, comprehensive bids are received and evaluated against the minimum hosting requirements. Brazilian forward Vinicius Jr has signed a new contract with Real Madrid that runs until 2027. Vinicius, 23, joined Madrid in 2018 from Brazilian club Flamengo and has developed into one of La Liga's standout players, scoring the winning goal in last year's Champions League final against Liverpool. Vinicius' existing contract was due to expire at the end of this season. Local media reported an extension had already been agreed last year, but it was only made official on Tuesday. The club provided no financial details, but Spanish media reported the arrangement includes a €1 billion release clause, identical to those inserted into the contract of several Barcelona youngsters. Vinicius finished 6th Monday in this year's Ballon d'Or voting and also received the Socrates Award, named after the Brazil icon in recognition of his humanitarian work. He also established the Vini Jr Institute, created in 2020, aims to use the popularity of football to help innovations in teaching and learning in Brazilian public schools. The project claims up to 15 schools and 10,000 students will benefit by the end of 2023, with more than 500 teachers employed. Vinicius has also won 9 trophies at Madrid, including 2 league titles along with the Champions League in 2022 and 2 FIFA Club World Cup trophies. Bolivia's soccer body announced on Tuesday the signing of Brazilian coach Antonio Carlos Zago to seek a comeback in South American World Cup qualifying after 4 matches. He will replace Gustavo Costas, who was fired last week. Zago, a former defender at Roma and several Brazilian clubs, is taking over shortly before 2 rounds of the round-robin competition in November. He was introduced by the head of Bolivia's Soccer Federation, Fernando Costa.
Y voy a trabajar mucho junto con mi cuerpo técnico para poder cambiar esta situación. De nuevo, agradezco la confianza, es un motivo de orgullo para mí poder defender ese país, que es un país que me identifico mucho desde el primer día que llegué aquí. Así que
Bolivia has 0 points after 4 rounds. It will take on Peru at home on November 16 and then play at Uruguay 5 days later. Last year, he won the Bolivian Championship as coach of Bolivar. The next World Cup in the United States, Mexico and Canada is expanding to a 48-team format, meaning direct entry to the top 6 teams in South America. The 7th-place team will contest an intercontinental playoff for a berth. World number 2 Carlos Alcaraz slipped to a shock defeat on his return from injury at the Paris Masters. Spanish Alcaraz had been given a bye in the first round but had no answer to Russian qualifier Roman Safulin, who eased through 6-3, 6-4. The Wimbledon champion looked off the pace as he made his return to action after withdrawing from the Swiss Indoor Championship last week due to injuries to his lower back and left foot. Safulin, ranked 45th in the world, cancelled out an early Alcaraz break in the first set and then never looked back as he ran on to claim the opener's 6-3. The same scenario then played out in the second set, with Alcaraz breaking for an early lead, only for his opponent to strike back immediately. Having only announced he would play in the tournament last Wednesday, Alcaraz looked far from his sharpest. However, much credit must go to Safulin, who was relentless in getting over the line for a career-boosting win in what was his first meeting with the Spaniard. The 26-year-old held his nerve under pressure from Alcaraz to serve out for the win despite facing several deuce points in the final game. The Russian kept his foot on the gas to earn the biggest win of his career. Meanwhile, the German 10th seed Alexander Zverev also had his difficulties, having to come back from a set down to beat Hungarian Martin Fucsovics for 6-7-5, 6-4 in the round of 64 at Bercy Arena. Zverev recovered from a slow start at the ATP Masters 1000 event in France, where he won 63% of his first serve points in the opening set. He recovered well, improving on serve as the match went on to earn his 52nd tour-level win of the year after 2 hours and 40 minutes. The world number 9 will continue the quest for his 3rd trophy of the year against Hugo Humbert after the Frenchman beat Marcos Giron 6-4, 6-3. Zverev is also still seeking to secure his place among top 8, who will go on to the Nitto ATP Finals in Turin next month. After this victory, the 2021 champion sits 7th, just behind Stefano Tsitsipas and 430 points ahead of 9th place Hubert Hurkacz. In another match, the 11th-seeded Hubert Hurkacz saw off Sebastian Korda 6-3, 6-7, 6-3 to book his place in the second round. The Pole failed to serve out the match at 5-4 in the second set, while he squandered a match point in the second set tie-break. However, he recovered in the decider to earn victory after 2 hours and 8 minutes. Hurkacz, who is aiming to make his second appearance at the Nitto ATP Finals, captured his second ATP Masters 1000 title in Shanghai earlier this month. The 26-year-old will next meet Roberto Bautista Agut.
6-3, 6-7, 6-3.
Thousands of South Africans brave cold, wet weather to greet the Rugby World Cup winning Springboks when they arrived in Johannesburg on Tuesday. Many wore green and gold, the colours of the national team, as they fill every available space at QOR Tambo Airport to greet the recorded 4-time world champion. South Africa edged greatest rivals New Zealand 12-11 in a gripping final in Paris last Saturday to achieve back-to-back titles after also winning the 1995 and 2007 title deciders. Supporters cheered in unison as captain Siya Kolisi emerged into the public area, waved at the crowd while holding the Webb Ellis Cup and took selfies with jubilant supporters. Many waved signs reading Boke or Springboks, a bunch of winners, as loud music played in the background, creating a party atmosphere. A band played the national anthem as the latest success brought joy to a country battling unemployment, electricity, water and crime crisis. Rugby is one of the three most popular sports in South Africa, but the only one to regularly deliver trophies. The football team has not triumphed since winning the 1996 Africa Cup of Nations, while the cricket side has yet to win a world title in any format.
76 minit tanpa henti,
76 minutes non-stop. Transparent and concise.
paparan komprehensif, ringkas dan padat. Saksikan Kanta 744, 7.44 malam. Berita perdana 8 malam.
Malaysia Tonight, 8:30 p.m.
That concludes today's edition of World Today. In our top story, at least 50 Palestinians killed in Israel airstrikes on Gaza refugee camp. Till then, I'm Sai Samsudin. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Thank you for watching.
RM18 juta bagi melaksanakan dan melancarkan urusan reformasi perundangan. Ini termasuk rang undang-undang, pelaksanaan hukuman gantian terhadap hukuman mati mandatory. Tuan Sri Ketua, Badan Kehakiman harus menjadi institusi bebas yang melindungi keluhuran perlembagaan persekutuan dan kedaulatan undang-undang. RM38 juta disediakan bagi meningkatkan produktiviti institusi kehakiman negara. Peruntukan ini mencakupi keutamaan membaik pulih prasarana serta menaik taraf kemudahan ICT mahkamah yang sudah usang dan rosak. Ini termasuk RM20 juta bagi memperkasa akademik kehakiman